Hey, what's going on, gang? Nate on the Stone here. Welcome back to the channel and to the 81st episode of The Rolling Stone. We are loaded for bear this week, gang. Have a lot of important things to talk about. The first thing that we need to start off with this week is Joe Biden. Because, unfortunately, it does look like he is going to become our 46th president. The longer that this continues to go on, and by this I mean the prolonged 2020 election. And if I could just veer off for 1 second, that in and of itself is a sign of the times. Did you know, for example, that California is still counting ballots over a month after Election Day? And California, the golden state, which their governor, Gavin Newsom, says should be the gold standard that every other state in the union follows. Every other state should be like California, according to Governor Newsom. California, the gold standard, is still counting ballots a month after Election Day. If that does not scream Banana Republic, if there was, what other evidence do we need that maybe we shouldn't be the premier power in the world? If we can't even count ballots in a timely fashion, if it takes the premier power in the world today, still supposedly, not counting China, over a month to count all of its ballots, there is something wrong. I'm just going to lay that out there. But anyway, it does look like Joe Biden, the Democrat Party, and the left is going to get away with the voter fraud that it concocted on Election Day, and that Joe Biden is going to be sworn in as the 46th president of the United States. Perhaps our first truly illegitimate president. Perhaps the right should start, perhaps the right should appropriate the hashtag resistance that were so popular on the left for the last 4 years. I mean, the left always accuses the right, accuses us, accuses you of being horrible appropriators of culture. Well, maybe we should appropriate that too. Just a thought. So, because of all that, because it looks like the left is going to actually get away with its fraud and its cheating and its illegitimate shenanigans, as is the official terminology now, we have to talk about Joe Biden. Because now, unfortunately, what happens to Joe Biden, what Joe Biden says, matters a great deal. So, the big news regarding Joe Biden this week is that apparently Joe Biden broke his foot. He had a hairline fracture on his right foot. Had to go into an orthopedist's office, and let's try saying that 4 times fast. And he is now wearing a boot. I don't know if it's called a medical boot or a surgical boot, but whatever the boot is, he's wearing it. And in fact, if everything goes according to the left's plan, and he is inaugurated next January, next month, he will be the first president to be inaugurated with a medical boot on his august person. So, another historical moment. Ooh, yay. But what is truly interesting about this, the fact that Joe Biden broke his foot isn't really that interesting until you actually realize this. Here's the thing. The media actually hid the fact that Biden broke his foot for 24 hours. Again, he did break it. He has a hairline fracture in his right foot, according to the reports. We're going to get to that in just 1 second. The press waited 24 hours before reporting that Biden had broken his foot. They waited 24 hours. Now, this in and of itself is important because Joe Biden, again, when he is in all likelihood inaugurated next month, is going to be the oldest man inaugurated president in U.S. history. He is going to be 78 when he is inaugurated, okay? By the time his first term of office comes to an end, he's going to be 82. He's going to be 82 years old. Which means, okay, that we can expect more things like this to happen to good old China Joe as the months roll into the years of his first term. Because the plain fact is that as we age, as we get older, we are more susceptible to cuts, bruises, trips, falls, spills, whatever, and our body is more easily hurt. That's just it. The best time actually to not get hurt is like when you're a kid, because you're still rubbery enough from being a baby that a lot of stuff just kind of rolls right off of you. Not saying that kids can't get hurt, they absolutely can. But a lot of things that, if the same thing happened to a 78-year-old, they're going to receive a lot more damage than if the same thing happened to like a 6-year-old or an 8-year-old, just because their body is older, it's more brittle, etc., etc., etc. So we have that, and we have the press covering up the fact that Biden had even gotten injured for 24 hours. Would that not be important news? Would that not be important news that the quote-unquote president-elect, which the left and the media has now basically turned into its own office, wouldn't the president-elect getting injured be newsworthy? But it wasn't. And this is actually revealing because it shows what is going to happen in the future, okay? You have a press, like we just said, we have our pieces now. We have a press that is not eager to report news that is detrimental to their people. Even common occurrences like, oh, someone got hurt and now they suffered a physical injury. And we have the fact that Joe Biden, as the oldest man ever elected to the presidency, is going to have more and more accidents like this. He's going to become more and more susceptible to accidents like this just because of age. What this suggests in my mind is that the entire veneer of the presidency, as it were, is going to change. And what I mean by that is that the presidency, the president has always been sort of front and center, even when he wasn't hogging the limelight. The president has always sort of been front and center. People have been assured that, yes, the president is there, he is in the White House, he is working, he is fulfilling his constitutional duties and all the rest, right? There's always been that assurance. And in fact, it was even more like this in the past. One of the ironies is that in the past, before social media, before the communications revolution of, what was it? I think it was the 70s with the advent of the computer, and that's when you started getting fax and emails and all that. Before that time, people had more access to the president than they do now. Even with, Twitter making their presence felt day in and day out, even when they hand out Oscars, they hand out Emmys, they're interviewed on podcasts like Obama was, and all that. But now all of that is going to change because now the left has a narrative to uphold. The narrative that it has to uphold is that Joe Biden is physically and mentally fit for office. Because remember, all during the election, there was no campaign. Let's not pretend that there was a campaign. But all throughout this election, all throughout this year, when Biden suffered memory lapses, when he seemed to choke on his own words, the media didn't report on that, or if they reported on it at all, they tried to cover it up. Oh, Joe had suffered from a stutter when he was younger, so talking about that was insensitive to people who are verbally challenged, communicatively challenged. And more often than not, they just sort of ignored it. What? That's nothing. Look at what Trump said over here. Look at what Trump tweeted over here. And then, of course, all the outrage was shifted. The focus was shifted because the right, like lemmings, stopped talking about Joe to defend Trump. So, now that Biden is seemingly going to be put into office, now the left is going to have to continue ignoring and covering up his mental and now his physical lapses, which suggests in my mind, like I said, that the presidency itself is going to change. The presidency now is going to become something that is that was much like the Chinese emperors in the old Chinese empires, okay? Because back then, no one was allowed to even see the emperor. You might have heard of the Forbidden City. That was actually the Chinese emperor's residency, and no one was allowed to see him. He had his own city built so that no one could look upon him because, according to Chinese mythology and the state mythology in and of itself, the emperor was divine. He was the son of heaven, and therefore puny mortals weren't allowed to gaze upon his majesty. The same thing is going to happen here. Now, that's perfectly all right if you have an all-powerful monarchy, okay? It doesn't really matter. In fact, it actually helps when you have an all-powerful monarchy because it keeps the monarch, it keeps the ruler, the sovereign. It keeps him sort of in the shadows. It keeps him away from prying eyes, which means that the aurora, the mystery, the majesty is enhanced. You know, you don't just see the emperor walking down the road strolling his dogs. No, he lives in this whole city to himself so that no one can look at him. And of course, that just enhances his image, the idea of his power, his mystery, as it were. It's brilliant optics, as a matter of fact. That cannot work, however, in a so-called, supposed, self-governing Republican society where everything is supposed to be out in the open. I mentioned before that the president used to be much more available to common people before the communications revolution, before social media. That's perfectly true. Calvin Coolidge, just a little historical tidbit, Calvin Coolidge was the last president to actually do this. Every Sunday after church, between, I think it was 10 in the morning and 1 o'clock, or maybe it was 11 to 2. Like Calvin Coolidge, when he was president, would stand every Sunday outside the White House doors. Just stand there, and anyone who wanted could come up, shake the president's hand, exchange pleasantries with him, and then ask him questions, right? When was Congress going to take up this bill? What was the president's opinion about this issue? What was the government going to do about this? Had the president heard about this? And it made the president not relatable. It didn't make him relatable, but it made him available. Common people felt that the president was not walled away in the White House. And he just, popped up every now and then to give a speech and then to run for re-election. No, the president was there. He was not a man of the people per se, but he was the people's man. He was there working for the people. And part of that was going out there and listening to the people, actually mingling with the people or allowing the people to come to him. Now again, Calvin Coolidge was the last one to do that. And we've had this sort of facade that the president, but we've still had this facade that the president is still available through email, through Twitter, and things like that. But now all of that is going to change because now to keep the narrative alive that old Joe is perfectly ready and willing and able, more importantly, able to fulfill his future duties as the 46th president, they're going to turn him, and by them I mean the left, the party, the media, they are going to turn the presidency into something much more akin to the old Chinese emperor, because Joe is going to be away from the limelight. More than likely, he will govern from the basement of the White House. I used to think that he would be inaugurated, and then at the end of January, maybe middle of February, they would pull the 25th Amendment. Oh, Joe, he's mentally incompetent. He can't govern anymore. Out goes Joe, in comes Kamala Harris. I don't think that's the case anymore. I think that for the next 4 years, they are going to keep him happy. They are going to basically keep him out of the limelight. He'll still appear to, sign bills, give little speeches, maybe once a month do a softball press conference, and the real power behind the throne, the faces of this administration, are going to be Kamala and Jill Biden. Those are going to be the people pulling the strings with the power. And the left is going to want to do that so that they can have 4 years of Joe Biden, and then they can have Kamala run for president in 2024. Why would you waste her by taking over for Joe just a few months into his presidency when you can have basically, theoretically, a 12-year Kamala Harris presidency? 4 for Biden's term, and then 8 years when theoretically she runs and wins in 2024 and then 2028. But in order to do that, again, they are going to have to maintain the fiction that Biden is actually able to govern. That it's really Joe doing all of this. He's working so hard, He doesn't have time to tweet. He doesn't have time to hold these huge rallies, etc., because gosh darn it, he's just so bound and determined to fix all of our problems, which he found, which he knew existed, and which were just so much bigger when he got into the White House. He realized they were so much bigger. That is going to be the narrative. But there's one other thing that this story shows. And it shows that the left has really learned one of the lessons of the Nazis. And I know you're not supposed to compare your opponents to Nazis or whatever, because people say, well, when you do that, you've lost the argument. But this is actually a real comparison game. So, like I said, the press covered up for 24 hours that Biden had hurt himself at all. Then we were told that Biden had he had injured his foot when he was walking one of his dogs, and then the story changed. It said, well, he was playing with one of his dogs. Now, that immediately sort of raised little red flags in my mind, because Joe Biden, based on this past year, again, Joe Biden doesn't seem to have the energy to play Jingle a String with a 20-year-old obese arthritic cat, let alone play with a dog. But that's beside the point, because now the story has changed again. This is from Red State. Okay? Headline, Biden, I was buck naked trying to pull my dog's tail when I broke my foot. And that's a little tongue-in-cheek, but not really. This is how the New York Post put it on Twitter. Joe Biden says he broke his foot tripping after shower when he pulled dog's tail. And as people were pointing out, why the hell would you be trying to pull your dog's tail after taking a shower? What, were you naked? Were you trying to pull your dog's tail when you were naked? I mean, as the headline playfully has Joe say. I mean, what sort of sick freak do you do that? So what, is this your other hobby besides sniffing little girls' hair? What's going on, Joe? And gang, I don't believe it for a second. I don't believe for a second that Joe Biden broke his foot when he tripped on a rug after taking a shower while trying to pull his dog's tail. This is the lesson that the left has learned from the Nazis and from Hitler. Before Hitler was elected Chancellor of Germany in 1933, in 1922, I want to say. In 1922, he and his newly formed Nazi party led what later came to be called the Beer Hall Revolt, or the Beer Hall Punts, which was him basically trying to take over the government immediately through a coup. And a couple of German generals in this specific beer hall, a couple of German generals from World War I were speaking, okay? And I'm not going to get into a lot of the details. Suffice to say, these German generals were seen as heroes. They were idolized by the German population of the time. And these generals were trying to plot their own coup as well. They were trying to bring back the old Kaisers, okay, which was absolutely forbidden by the Treaty of Versailles, which had ended World War I. Anyway, Hitler and his Nazi party, they break in to this beer hall. And they hustle the generals backstage. And Hitler says, I'm taking over. Me and my Nazi party, we're taking over the government. And I want you to join me. And the generals are all like, you're crazy. No, we're not going to join a little nobody like you. Because that had actually been part of Hitler's plan. This is why he had broken into this specific beer hall at this specific time. He was going to go in there, get the generals' support, which then would have given him the people's support, and then he would have been able to march on Berlin and take over the halls of government quite easily in his mind. So when the generals said, nothing doing, pal, who are you again? We're not giving you our support for anything. That most people would have just collapsed right there. But Hitler did something quite ingenious. He went out to the stage and told everybody there that the generals had agreed to join him. He told them who he was, what his plan was, gave him a little speech, and he said, oh yeah, those generals, they've got my back. It was a huge, bold-faced lie. But Hitler told it, and the reason was because Hitler understood that people are far more willing to believe big lies than they are to believe little lies. It's just part of human nature. We're much more willing to believe the big lies than the little lies. And that's what's happening right here. The left is feeding us this cock and bull story about a buck naked Joe Biden breaking his foot because he was trying to pull his dog's tail in some sort of perverse game after taking a shower, because they know that people are more likely to believe the big lie. Because people are going to say, well, this has to be. A lot of people are going to say this has to be true because it's so preposterous that no one would even think of coming up with this lie because it sounds too fake. And that's the point. It's sort of a reverse psychology. That's what that's what Joe Biden's foot shows us. The presidency is going to be changed to hide the president, simply because Joe Biden is not physically or mentally fit to be president. So they're going to have to hide him away in the basement of the White House. And two, we can expect more stories like this, just more absolutely zane, bonker stories like this, because they know that people will believe the big lies. Maybe not the little lies, but they will believe the big lies. Those are the two things this story shows us, and that is story number one.